My name's Eric Marshall, and I am the grandson to Alonzo and Henrietta Marshall, who were the owner and operators of Marshall's Recreations. And they built this building in about 1946. It's a really neat building. It's got a lot of character to it. It still has, I have, because my grandparents kept everything, I have, an enormous amount of information that kind of recreates what they went through to have this business back in the 40s, late 40s. So it's pretty special to me. I have a lot of memories in here with having spent so much time with my grandpa. We're talking about the late 30s and early 40s when my grandfather got started. He actually bought the business from another family here in Marion, and I don't know how many years it existed before that, but that was in 1937, and it was actually at a different location. So you're talking about, a total different time for the United States. It was still largely segregated. Blacks and whites did not commingle. So the business that my grandfather bought and then later ended up having bought out and then had his own was basically the only place that black people could go for any kind of social, spot other than church. They were originally in a different facility about 2 blocks from here, which I don't think the building exists anymore. And for some reason or another, they were the lease was not renewed, so he had to find a new place to operate. And so that would have been about 8 years after him being in business. So he wanted to start looking for property to buy to build his own building. He couldn't go directly to the person that owned this property and say, hey, I want to buy this property, because they wouldn't sell it to an African American. So he had established a relationship with a Jewish man who was one of the beer distributors. And that man, he and that man became friends, and his name was Charlie Goldthait. And he bought the property with the sole purpose of turning around and selling it to my grandfather. So that's like an untold story of Marion, where the Jewish families were helping out African Americans. I don't know any other way to put it. There's at least one book of history about Marion's history, and it makes no mention of my grandfather and this business. And I find that very hard to believe, because it was the only social place that African Americans could go for several decades. And I don't know how that could be not mentioned. And the interesting thing to that is that he did not operate, or I should say they didn't operate in a vacuum. So they could not have had a business like this and not had suppliers. So there were lots of other businesses in Marion that sold to my grandfather, that obviously had to be owned by white people. So it's not like it was some secret society that no one knew of. Everyone knew that there was a Marshalls. And there were a lot of people that probably made a lot of good money off of my grandfather, because I think he did pretty well here. For about 50 years, they were in business. And my grandfather passed away in 1983, in which I was in college at the time. And my dad, who had worked at General Motors for his whole professional career, retired from that job and tried to take over this business. And so he did that for a few years, but as it turns out, he had lung cancer. So we found that out my senior year of college, and after I graduated, I decided to move back to Marion to be here for my family. I had higher aspirations of becoming a photojournalist and working for National Geographic and traveling the world and setting the world on fire with photography. And so I detoured back home, and I didn't really want to get into the restaurant tavern business, so I decided to open my own studio. I've been involved with so many organizations, and I'm the outgoing president of Main Street Marion, which is a downtown organization that's focused on trying to create some economic opportunities for downtown businesses or property owners and those types of things. And I think if we can get, let's say if someone were to come in here and put in a restaurant, which I think our downtown needs. We have one right next door, but we need some other options. But hopefully somebody can walk in here and maybe take a hold of the history that's here and then put their own spin on it and create a place where people feel comfortable coming to. One of the things I loved about my grandfather's advertising is says we reserve the right to seat anyone. And at a time when people were putting on their menu that we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, that always stuck out as a real positive thing, an underlying theme of what my grandfather tried to create here. I still have a very bullish attitude that it's possible here in Marion. I think there's huge potential, and it just takes somebody to, take a risk.